I'll never forget that night. My name was supposed to shine on a digital billboard in Times Square right beside the company logo I had helped build from the ground up. I had spent weeks preparing for this product launch, years if you counted the countless nights when I kept the system alive while everyone else slept. But when the screen lit up, my name wasn't there. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a glitch. It was gone, erased, like I had never existed. I stood in the middle of New York's most crowded street, surrounded by flashing lights and cheering crowds, and felt like a ghost. The CEO, Gavin Stone, smiled for the cameras, taking credit for work he didn't even understand. He called my department legacy clutter. He called me replaceable overhead. And the worst part? Everyone laughed. In that moment, I felt two things at once: the crushing weight of humiliation and the sharp clarity that comes when you realize people have underestimated the wrong person. My heart was racing, but my mind was already moving faster than theirs. They thought I was out. They thought the backbone of their empire could be erased with one swipe of a slide deck. They had no idea what they just set in motion. Before I tell you what happened next, where are you watching from? And let me ask you something. Have you ever worked so hard, given everything, only to feel invisible when it mattered most? Leave a comment if this strikes a chord with you. Your story might be the one that helps someone else feel seen. People like Gavin love the spotlight. They thrive on applause, headlines, and the illusion that they alone carry the company. But the truth is different. Behind every launch, every glowing number on a quarterly report, there's someone like me working quietly unseen, making sure the gears never stop turning. For years, that someone was me. I kept the heart of our operations alive: billing systems, onboarding flows, compliance checks, integrations. No one else even understood. While the executives made speeches about innovation and velocity, I stayed in the shadows, patching holes, rewriting broken code, and holding the company together one late night at a time. Most people never saw it. In fact, that was the point. If I did my job right, nobody noticed. Success meant silence. But silence also meant being overlooked, and over time, that silence began to feel heavy. Sometimes, new hires would look at me like I was an obstacle. "Why do we need her approval?" they'd whisper. Or worse, "She slows us down." I'd smile politely, because what else could I do? Explaining the system was like explaining bones to someone who only cared about skin. They wanted shiny apps and quick results. I was the skeleton underneath, invisible but essential. Did it sting? Of course it did. Nobody wants to be treated like a speed bump when they've built the road. But I told myself that my work spoke louder than their arrogance. Systems don't lie, and mine ran flawlessly. Still, deep down, I wondered how long it would last. How long before someone decided the backbone wasn't worth keeping just because they couldn't see it? That thought haunted me more than I admitted. And as it turned out, I didn't have to wait long to find out. The email came on a Tuesday morning, just 3 words in the subject line: transition review scheduled. No explanation, no context, no hint of what transition even meant. I stared at the screen, sipping my coffee, trying to convince myself it was routine. But my gut told me otherwise. I walked down the hall to my manager's office. He was already standing, shifting awkwardly like someone waiting for bad weather to pass. "Is this about me?" I asked, holding up my phone. He gave me that polite corporate smile, the kind people use when they're not allowed to tell you the truth. "It's just a standard review, nothing to worry about." Nothing to worry about, right. I'd heard that line before. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving underneath the surface. On paper, the company was celebrating record growth, but I had seen enough to know that surface numbers don't tell the whole story. Systems leave traces, and I had been quietly collecting them for years. Every outage, every compliance gap, every late-night patch that kept the lights on when nobody else even noticed. Some people journal to process their thoughts. I documented. I kept detailed notes, screenshots, time-stamped logs. Not because I planned to use them, but because I hated the way executives rewrote history. Data doesn't lie. And if anyone tried to erase me, I wanted proof that I had been there. That night, I opened one of my old binders. The pages smelled faintly of ink and dust. Each note reminded me of a time I had saved the company from chaos. Reading them was strangely comforting and strangely sad. It was like holding the receipts for a life nobody else remembered. As I closed the binder, a question settled heavy in my chest. What exactly were they planning to transition me into? And deep down, I already feared the answer. The Sky Bar was all glass and glitter, perched above downtown Chicago, with a view that stretched for miles. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, a reward for the team's hard work. Everyone was dressed sharp, drinks in hand, laughter echoing against the tall windows. I tried to blend in, to remind myself I still belonged there. But then Gavin raised his glass. His voice cut through the music. "To new beginnings," he said, smiling like a man who thought he owned the skyline. "We're trimming the fat, cutting legacy clutter, and making this company faster, leaner, unstoppable." At first, I thought maybe it was just empty bravado. But then his eyes swept the room, and I caught it. Just a flicker, but enough. His gaze landed on me. And then came the words that silenced even the laughter. She served her purpose, but now she's just expensive overhead. It hit harder than I expected. People chuckled, some nervously, others like they were in on the joke. I felt heat rise in my face, but I stayed still, gripping my glass so tightly I thought it might break. My manager shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. No one did. I remember staring at the city lights below, thinking how small people looked from up there. Maybe that was the problem. To them, I was small, replaceable, a line item to cut. I didn't say a word. I didn't storm out or make a scene. Instead, I set my glass down, gently smoothed the sleeve of my jacket, and walked toward the elevator. Let them think they had the last word. Because in that moment, I wasn't broken. I was awake, and I knew exactly where to look next. The meeting was short, almost too polished, like it had been rehearsed 100 times before. HR called it a restructuring conversation. I sat across from them, the city skyline behind the glass, listening to carefully chosen words, streamlining efficiency, shifting resources. The language of endings, dressed up to sound like opportunity. I nodded, pretending to absorb it all. Inside my heart was steady. They expected me to fight, maybe even beg. But I had already decided I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. "Thank you for your contributions," the HR rep said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were papers to sign, a checklist, and an envelope labeled exit file. The phrase made me laugh silently. After everything I'd built, they were handing me a file, as if that was my legacy. I signed each stroke of the pen slow and deliberate. Then I asked, as casually as I could, "Can I get a copy of the system handover notes for my own reference?" The HR rep didn't see the weight of that question, just another item to tick off. She nodded and printed it without hesitation. I gathered my things, walked out with my badge still clipped to my jacket, and rode the elevator down. No tears, no scene, just silence. But before leaving the building, I stopped in the empty break room, opened my laptop, and made one final adjustment. A single pull request. Barely a handful of lines of code. Nothing flashy, nothing anyone would notice right away. But it shifted ownership of a critical module quietly, cleanly, into the LLC I had formed years earlier. To anyone else, it would look routine. To me, it was a line drawn in invisible ink. When I closed my laptop, the room felt strangely lighter, like I'd left a piece of myself behind, one they wouldn't understand until much later. And as I stepped into the street, the wind colder than I expected, one thought kept circling in my mind. What happens when they try to move forward without me? At first, everything seemed fine. They moved on without me, exactly as they planned. The emails went out announcing a seamless transition. Smiling photos of Gavin and his new leadership team filled the company intranet. To the outside world, nothing had changed. But I knew better. Systems don't fail loudly in the beginning. They whisper. The first whisper came in the form of a delayed onboarding report. Nothing dramatic, just a routine dashboard stuck on loading longer than usual. Most people would refresh the page and move on. But to me, it was like hearing the faintest crack in a sheet of glass. A few days later, customer support tickets doubled. New clients couldn't log in properly, invoices were misaligned, small glitches piling up in corners. Most executives never bothered to check. I could almost picture the junior engineers huddled around their screens, trying to figure out why a system that had run flawlessly for years was suddenly resisting. Then came the message. Not from HR, not from Gavin, but from Marcus, a developer who had worked with me for years. He reached out on LinkedIn. Just one line. Your code has a vibe. It doesn't like them. I stared at the message, unsure whether to laugh or feel vindicated. He didn't know about the small adjustment I had made before leaving. He just knew the system wasn't cooperating with its new masters. From the outside, the company still looked stable. Investors were happy. Leadership kept boasting about speed over legacy. But underneath, I could feel it. Hairline fractures spreading slowly, silently, waiting for pressure to make them impossible to ignore. And I couldn't help but wonder how long before those tiny cracks turned into something they couldn't contain. I started hearing stories not long after the first glitches appeared. Quiet complaints trickling through back channels. A sales manager venting on LinkedIn about technical delays slowing down a big client. A customer success rep writing that she was working weekends to fix systems that used to run themselves. Inside the company, though, Gavin and his circle pretended everything was under control. At the next board meeting, he stood in front of a polished slide deck filled with clean graphs and bright colors. Numbers smoothed out issues buried under creative labels like narrative anchors and temporary variants. The truth had been scrubbed until it shined. I want everyone focused on the future, Gavin said, his voice calm, rehearsed. Legacy is behind us. We are building leaner, faster, smarter. I could picture the board members nodding along, some convinced, others too cautious to question him. Denial can be contagious in rooms like that. Nobody wants to be the first to say out loud what everyone secretly fears. But not everyone was silent. A friend, still inside, told me about a tense moment when the head of compliance leaned forward and asked, "Who exactly holds the license for the orchestration framework?" The room went quiet. For a second, even Gavin had no line prepared. Then he laughed it off, waved his hand, and said, "It's a non-issue. Let's stay focused." That silence told me more than any answer could, because systems can be patched, numbers can be faked, but licenses are legal anchors. And if they didn't know who controlled the backbone of their empire, then the cracks were wider than even I imagined. They might have fooled the investors for now, but they weren't fooling the system, and they weren't fooling me. The question was, how much longer could they keep pretending? It started in the middle of the night, 3 a.m. Chicago time. I wasn't there, of course. I was hundreds of miles away by then. But I can still imagine the scene. A junior engineer, half asleep, watching his monitor flash red. A login request denied. Then another. Then the dashboard itself flickered, replaced by a gray screen with a message no one expected to see. Continuity triggered, T-1200. At first, they must have thought it was a glitch. Someone tried to override it. Another engineer spoofed credentials, forcing access. But with every attempt, the clock ticked faster. 11:45, 11:30, 11:0. I heard about it hours later through a friend who couldn't contain himself. "It's like the system's alive," he whispered over the phone. "Every time they fight it, it pushes back harder." I just listened quietly, staring out the window at the city still asleep. A part of me felt guilty knowing the chaos they were in, but another part of me, the part that remembered Times Square, the Sky Bar, the humiliation, felt something else, clarity. Because this wasn't sabotage. It wasn't revenge in the way they would paint it. It was simply the system following rules they never cared to learn, rules I had written, rules I still controlled. By morning, panic had spread through every corridor. Executives barked orders, legal teams scrambled for answers, and Gavin tried to keep his voice steady in all hands calls. But the clock on the screen didn't care about tone or authority. T-minus 0734. Someone gasped loud enough for the whole room to hear. And for the first time, they began to understand this wasn't a bug to fix. It was a fuse already lit. When the countdown began flashing across every internal screen, there was no more room for denial. The system wasn't asking for attention, it was demanding it. That's when the lawyers were pulled into the room. I wasn't there in person, but I've been told how it unfolded. A long oak conference table, investors on video screens, executives pale and restless, and Gavin trying to keep control of the room. His voice was firm, almost sharp. It's a technical hiccup, nothing more. But then David, the company's senior counsel, spoke up. He had been quiet for most of the chaos, sifting through files, reviewing contracts, line by line. And finally, he slid one particular binder to the center of the table. His words cut through the noise. Clause 7B, Operational Continuity. The license for the orchestration framework is not owned by the company. The room froze. What do you mean? Gavin snapped, his face tightening. David adjusted his glasses, calm but heavy. The license resides with an independent entity. A limited liability company formed years ago by the system's architect. And unless there's a negotiated handover, which there isn't, this trigger we're seeing is enforcement, not malfunction. Someone muttered, "That can't be right." Another asked, "Are we saying she still owns it?" David didn't flinch. "I'm saying the system is following the legal structure you all ignored. This isn't sabotage, it's compliance." Silence followed, the kind of silence that swallows an entire room. From where I sat, far away and unseen, I could almost feel that silence. The sudden weight pressing down on people who thought they had erased me. They had called me overhead, they had laughed. But now they were realizing the truth. The backbone they dismissed was never theirs to begin with. And as the clock ticked down, I wondered what would collapse first, their pride or their empire. The moment the lawyers confirmed the truth, the countdown stopped being an abstract threat. It became reality, and reality doesn't negotiate. By late morning, the cracks were no longer whispers hidden in back channels. They were loud, public, and impossible to cover up. The investor call was supposed to reassure everyone. Gavin stood in front of the cameras, tie perfectly straight, voice steady at first. Our systems are stable. Our future is bright. But on the other side of the live stream, dashboards began freezing in real time. Investors blinked at blank screens where data should have been. Some tried refreshing, others thought it was their own connection. Until the same gray message appeared for everyone all at once. Continuity revoked. License holder, Quinn Systems, LLC. I wasn't in that room, but I can imagine the silence followed by panic. Phones buzzing, side chats exploding, assistants rushing in and out. Gavin tried to keep speaking, his mouth moving while the numbers behind him vanished one by one. Meanwhile, clients noticed. Support lines lit up like sirens. Our invoices are stuck. We can't access the portal. What's happening over there? The problems weren't isolated anymore. They were global, spreading faster than excuses could cover. And through it all, I sat in a quiet cafe, my laptop closed, my coffee cooling in front of me. People around me scrolled their phones, unaware that across the city, a multi-million-dollar empire was unraveling in plain sight. It struck me how fragile it all was. Years of arrogance, millions spent on image, all undone in minutes by something they thought they could control, something they thought they had erased. The collapse wasn't coming, it was happening, live, undeniable, unstoppable. And yet for me, this was not the end. It was only the beginning of what they still had to face. While their world unraveled, mine grew quieter. I was back in my small apartment in Brooklyn, the kind of place where the walls hum faintly from the radiator and the city sounds are softened into a distant lull. I set the kettle on the stove, poured steaming water over the leaves, and waited. The phone on my table wouldn't stop vibrating. Calls, emails, urgent messages stacked on top of each other. A dozen missed calls from blocked numbers. A string of desperate subject lines. Urgent. Call back now. Please respond. We need to talk. I didn't open a single one. Instead, I sat at the little wooden table by the window, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, letting the steam warm my face. The tea tasted slightly bitter, but it was honest. No filters, no spin, no corporate slogans. Just leaves and water. Real. There was something almost poetic about it. The louder they became, voices raised in boardrooms, investors shouting on conference lines, customers demanding answers, the more silent my own space became. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of their demands pressing on my shoulders. I didn't feel invisible. I felt free. One message flashed on my screen longer than the others. A direct plea. "Harper, please, just talk to us. We can work this out." I stared at it for a moment, then let the phone go dark. Not out of cruelty, but because I knew the truth. They weren't reaching out to me. They were reaching for control they had already lost. I lifted the cup again, let the tea cool on my tongue, and breathed. Somewhere, a fuse was still burning, and the end of it was closer than they realized. And as I sat there in the calm, I asked myself, when the last spark reaches the end, what will be left standing? By the end of that week, the collapse was complete. The countdown ended not with an explosion, but with silence. The kind of silence only broken systems leave behind. Investor trust evaporated. Customers pulled out, and Gavin's confident smile never made another headline. One by one, the people who had laughed at that Skybar toast were called into hearings, trying to explain how they had ignored something so obvious. And me, I didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no victory dance, just quiet evenings, my name finally unburdened from the weight of their dismissal. The company I had built my career around no longer existed in the same way, but the truth had survived. My work, my role, my presence, it hadn't been erased after all. What stayed with me most wasn't the chaos they endured, but the reminder it left in my own heart. People may overlook you, dismiss you, or even erase you in public, but that doesn't mean your value disappears. Foundations are invisible until they're gone, and when they're gone, everything else falls apart. The real victory wasn't in watching them stumble. It was in realizing I didn't need their recognition to prove my worth. I had already proven it 1,000 times in the quiet hours when no one was watching. So if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Don't measure your value by the spotlight or by the people who fail to see you. Measure it by the strength you bring when it matters most, even if nobody claps for it. Now I'll turn the question to you. Have you ever felt invisible only to realize later that you were the one holding everything together? Leave a comment and share your story. You never know who might need to hear it today.